So we will go ahead and get started now. Again, thank you all so much for attending today. We're really excited to host this panel. This is hosted by Student Conduct and Conflict Resolution with support with Center for Teaching Excellence. So we will go ahead and get started now. So just to give everyone a really brief overview before we get started with the panel of what the Student Conduct and Conflict Resolution Office is. Our office oversees all of the expectations and behavioral requirements for students to follow while they're enrolled here at the University of Florida. So we want to make sure that we are enforcing that and making sure that students are exhibiting the positive behaviors that we know that they can. And that's why we have such a positive reputation. So we want to make sure that we are enforcing that as well. So just to give everyone a little overview of the conduct process and kind of how restorative dialogue fits into that process. We receive reports from a lot of individuals across the campus community, whether that is faculty and staff members, that can also be from other students or parents or family, any other of those types of individuals. We kind of review that information, determine whether charges may apply in that situation, maybe request a little bit of additional documentation, and then we will move forward and invite students to have a one-on-one conversation with our office to talk through what their options look like, how they can resolve the case, and if they want to accept responsibility or not accept responsibility. And with that, the next step of that process is for students to decide how they want to move forward with the case. So they can, like I said, accept or not accept responsibility. And with that, they can do kind of an informal resolution process with either an administrative review or a restorative dialogue conversation, or they can go through a formal process, which is a hearing, and that can either be with a committee or with an individual hearing officer. So we kind of talk students through what these options are. And then, like I said, the informal process is where the restorative dialogue comes into play. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that specifically. So a restorative dialogue, so like I said before, students are going to have to accept responsibility in order to opt into a restorative dialogue. And this is really just an opportunity for the student to talk about their perspective of the incident. So they're accepting responsibility, they're acknowledging that they had some wrongdoing in that incident, and they're going to be able to talk through that. And so the restorative dialogue includes the faculty or instructor in that conversation to share their perspective as well, because as you all know, there's a lot of different things that kind of go into a conduct procedure. We'll hear from our panelists to hear about their specific experiences as well a little bit later. But we want to make sure that the student is aware of how their actions have impacted others, whereas that could be just the instructor or students overall in the course. Faculty are able to agree to participate. So you're not forced to participate whatsoever. You can make an indication on your initial report that you might be willing to, and you can withdraw your willingness at any time. So even if you said, yes, I am willing to on the report, if you decide later on that you just don't have time, or this case is just something that's you're not really interested in pursuing a further conversation with students about, you can always withdraw that agreement later. But really, it's meant to be a very casual kind of conversation. We want to make sure that it's not formal and structured. So there's not a script like there might be in a hearing. We want to make sure that students are able to share their perspective in that natural tone. And then we want to kind of hear everyone else's perspective as well. So the goal is to help everyone kind of understand the impact of behaviors, understanding, what the overall process looks like after the case and everything like that. And then, like I said, after that case has been resolved, that is when sanctions will be implemented. So our office will determine sanctions for students with a status sanction and educational sanctions, and whether or not they have the ability to drop or withdraw from the course based on any specific experiences that they may have shared, like medical experiences or anything that may have happened during the semester. And then faculty, after that restorative dialogue conversation, can enter that grade adjustment sanction once the case has been resolved. So before I move forward, does anyone have any questions really quickly before we get into the panel? Wonderful. So we'll go ahead and get started. And I will try to make sure that I go the right way when I'm using this. So we have a wonderful group of panelists here. I have them all pinned on our screen so everyone hopefully will be able to see everyone. So we have a lot of different colleges represented, a lot of different instructors and levels of course instruction that we have. So I'll give everyone a chance, each of our panelists, to share a little bit about themselves. So if every one of our panelists could share what your role is on campus and what courses you instruct. And we can start with whoever wants to start. We can kind of popcorn style.
I don't mind starting. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. My name is Mona. I work in pediatrics, like the slide had said. My formal role is in research within here in peds, but I actually teach adjunct with my home college that I got my degree in, which is the College of Health and Human Performance. And so I'm an adjunct faculty in teaching health and medical terminology.
I guess I'll go next. My name's Nicole Gerlach. I'm in the Department of Biology. I am an associate instructional professor, and so I teach a variety of different classes. I teach some upper level classes in animal behavior and biodiversity. I contribute to the majors introductory biosequence, Bio 1 and Bio 2. And I also teach BSc 2005, which is the non-majors gen ed biology course.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Shu. I'm currently serving as an undergraduate advising coordinator over in the Fisher School of Accounting. A lot of the context I will be speaking on today is actually in my previous role working as an academic advisor in the Food and Resource Economics Department located under the College of Ag and Life Sciences. I see a few folks out there from FRE, so hello. So I'm glad to be here.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Aris, and I'm in the Department of Anatomy and Cell Biology, also in the College of Medicine. And I do a lot of different kinds of teaching. The courses I direct include Foundations of Medicine for first-year medical students, a histology course for first-year dental students, and then perhaps most relevant here is that I direct an undergraduate class called Human Histology.
Thank you all so much. So like I said before, we have a really great diverse group of panelists with us with the colleges that they represent. So let's talk a little bit more about how you all approach academic integrity in your courses or how you have done that in the past. And how are you ensuring that students are aware of your expectations on all of the assignments that you have?
So I can start. I pretty much just include the standard language that I find online in the course syllabus and ask students to be aware of the course syllabus, but I don't actually explicitly go over student conduct and expectations in the classroom. So that's perhaps something that I should start doing.
So for most of my experience that I'm going to be talking about today comes from the non-majors gen ed intro bio class. And that is an entirely online asynchronous course. So I don't get to, stand in front of them and talk about it. But the way that I have the course set up is I've got the language in the syllabus, but before students are able to access any of the other graded material in the course, except for like the introduce yourself assignment, before they can do anything else in the course, they have to pass a quiz on Canvas about the academic integrity expectations. And they can take the quiz as many times as they need in order to get a perfect score. But that lets me put sort of common misconceptions, common scenarios that have come up in the past on that quiz so that everybody, in order to participate in the course, has to affirm that they understand sort of the basic principles of what I'm expecting in terms of academic integrity.
Very similar to Nicole, so health and medical terminology, I'm sure everyone has heard of it. It's one of the largest online courses that I feel those students who are geared towards health are not complete. So I definitely have a lot of students from varying majors taking the course online. I do the same as Nicole where, it's in the, well, also John too, it's in the syllabus. I have an orientation quiz. Then actually, in addition to all of that, I will post up the exam guidelines and kind of just like overall guidelines for the course before the exam itself. So you know how Honor Lock will allow you to do that. So that's posted up on there as well. And I will send out usually like a message through Canvas, just kind of reminding like the expectations of for is more importantly for major tests and exams. But I try to remind them students through blast announcements on Canvas every now and then.
I would say very similarly, it's in the syllabus. I go a little bit more than the boilerplate. So I will cover not only the boilerplate, but I'll also go over common violations that we've seen in the past, so plagiarism and falsifying information, and then what those academic sanctions would look like in terms of grade adjustments, just so they're aware that if they are found in violation. I also include information of like, hey, if I do suspect a violation, I will be sending that. There would be no communication, just kind of setting up those expectations early. Syllabus will kind of cover not only the code, but maybe some situations that are a little bit in that gray area of could this potentially be a violation, or would this be something I would submit to student conduct? And then of course, any kind of assignments that are essay based that, could potentially lead to future violations. We hope that students don't, but we always want to err on the side of caution. So anything that essay based and say, hey, don't forget to cite your sources. Please don't copy and paste. I also try to include examples. So for our final project in AED 3935, which is a class I used to teach, the development plan, I included several examples in which included proper citations, what the assignment should look like. So they're able to further see what an assignment should look like and properly plan, so they're not at least tempted to potentially violate the honor code.
Thank you all. So I'm going to actually do a quick follow-up question to everyone who is willing to answer from our panel. I think Danielle brought up a really good point about the grade adjustment sanction. So I know that that's something that faculty is able to determine. Panelists, besides Danielle, since you already shared, would you all be willing to share, is there a standard grade adjustment sanction that you always give? Is there wiggle room depending on what the context of the incident is and kind of what your perspective is on how you approach those types of situations?
Yeah, so in like Danielle said, in the language in my syllabus, I do list sort of the standard penalty for incidents of things like plagiarism or copying from a friend, whatever. And my standard penalty is a 0 on the assignment, and as well as a full letter grade drop in the class. And that is really just to reflect, if they hadn't turned in the assignment at all, they would have gotten the 0. So the full additional letter grade is to sort of reflect the consequences that their decision to use somebody else's work has on me and on the rest of my students. And there is some wiggle room. It's the syllabus, I believe, says something to the effect of, at minimum, this is the penalty for each incident.
For me, I have a grade adjustment section on my syllabus, but with regards to academic integrity, I stick with just a 0 on the exam. So since my course is typically just online, a lot of the violations come from with the exams, not necessarily the assignments, since I'm memorizing a lot of terms. So it's just a 0 on the exam and no really any wiggle room there because of the amount of students that I have. But I will say, Danielle, I just wanted to say you have some really great content that I think I will incorporate for this semester with regards to expectations up front. So thank you for sharing all that.
I don't have information on grade impact or grade penalties in my syllabus, and I've just been making some notes. Maybe I should include that. I like the idea of also including information in the syllabus about the process at UF, which means informing UF directly without informing the student. That's something that students were surprised to learn about. But what I've done in the past has always been to give the student a 0 for the exam for which there was some incident. And then the result is always at least a letter grade lowering because there are 3 major exams in the undergraduate course that I teach. For the other courses I teach in professional colleges, College of Medicine, College of Dentistry, any kind of a violation actually goes to a specific committee. So I would actually not play a direct role. Either the academic status committee or the spec committee would make the decision regarding the student. And that's been less of an incident. So less of a problem. I would say the main reason I'm here today is to comment on situations that have arisen in the undergraduate human histology course that I mentioned early on.
That's great. Thank you all so much for sharing that additional perspective. So the next question I will pose is without sharing specific student information. So please don't share any student names or any identifying things for protection, everything like that. Please describe your experiences or experience in participating in our restorative dialogue resolution. So kind of things to think about. What did you expect the first time you participated? How did you feel the incident was addressed? How did you share your perspective and view? And anyone is able to jump in.
I guess I'll take the first crack at it. So, you know, I've dealt with honor code violations in the past, and serving as an academic advisor and teaching students within my major, it kind of gets a little sensitive, right? Just because students are often coming back for academic advising after they take my class, and it gets a little awkward. So, I'm always nervous in any kind of like hearing or terms of restorative dialogue, particularly just because I'm not quite aware of how the student is going to react. So, given, yes, feeling nervous going into restorative dialogue is definitely normal, just because there's a lot of things that can come into play. But I will say, based on my experience so far, it was really, really helpful just because, like you mentioned, John, just saying that we don't really correspond with students when we report them to SCCR. This is a really great time in which we can kind of talk to each other in a very structured format and say, you know, the student can kind of communicate their side and also what they learned and what happened. And then for us as faculty and staff to really communicate of, you know, in most case scenarios, at least in my case, that I don't judge the student. You know, things happen, and you know, it sometimes it's a mistake, sometimes it's not. And it's not going to impact how I think about students. And I think that often gets missed. And this restorative dialogue really kind of focuses on connecting that faculty and staff with the student, which I think is really, really helpful for repairing that relationship, especially if it is a student in your major that you may see later on, or just kind of painting a different picture in terms of how students interact with SCCR with more of an educational kind of approach rather than just punishment.
I love that, all that you said, Danielle. I echo it. I will say, I feel exactly the same. I'm always nervous, which I don't think students get to hear or know that we are also like anxious about any type of interaction when it comes to, you know, an honor code violation and anything like that. I My first experience with the restorative dialogues, I wasn't sure what to expect because from what I know about restorative, anything is restorative justice. So I wasn't sure if it was going to follow a similar path of, you know, what you had just spoken about. You know, the person's sharing their story, we're trying to repair the relationship, involve that dialogue. And I think my main goal too is what you had said at the end is, you know, I want to make sure that the student understands that we understand where they're coming from and what might have happened, like you said, is a mistake, and that it's not something that we were directing towards them and, you know, singling them out for whatever situation, especially for online courses where I don't know their faces or anything like that. I don't want them to feel like they were singled out in any type of way. So I do want to make sure that they know that our community of instructors and professors, we are listeners, and we were students once, and we understand what that's like to be in that, you know, in that boat and make mistakes, even if it was something that's not as great as, you know, eventually being reported to the student conduct and conflict resolution office. But we understand where they're coming from, and we're trying to humanize that and make sure that, you know, they feel like they could come to us afterwards, like you said, even if it's not in an advising capacity, that future or later on, if they have an issue or, you know, take another course with us, that it's not going to be a strained relationship, like you said. And I'm very grateful for like Savannah and the folks at SSCR, because without them, I feel like I would not be able to. Sometimes they have such great perspectives and repeat things just like in a way that I'm always mind blown. I'm like, wow, they heard that in such a great and empathetic way that's also teaching me. So during those dialogues, it's a co-learning for both the student and myself, you know? So, and I think it's a really good opportunity for us to take a part of.
So I agree with everything that Danielle and Mona have said so far. And I wanted to add that I've had, before the restorative dialogue was implemented as part of the SCCR process, I had a lot of previous experience with the sanction hearings for students who were contesting the sanctions. And so I was my first restorative dialogue, I was going into it sort of expecting kind of the same thing. And I found that the restorative dialogues are a lot less confrontational. There's not like, it's not the student, you know, trying to prove you wrong and not, and vice versa. It's less combative. It really is just a chance to hear what's going on with them. Because particularly in large classes or online classes or large online classes, you know, we don't get to see our students, so we only know what's going on with them if they come to us. So getting to hear that perspective has been really valuable, and a chance for them to recognize that there is actually a person behind the course announcements, I think has been really useful as well. So my experience with the dialogues themselves has been a lot easier, I think, than I was first expecting.
So I'll begin by saying that the way I think about it is similar to what's already been said. I think we've all been keen to highlight and echo what others have said. So when I'm thinking about what's already been said, the only thing that I would add is in terms of restoration, I would say that it's not so much about the relationship with me as it is kind of restoring the student's sense of equanimity. And often the student has an interaction with a parent or other important loved one in their life. So there are these ripples that go across the surface of the pond to people in their personal lives and their family lives. Or, for example, there was one matter this past spring that had to do with a graduate student and the graduate student's mentor. So that was a key relationship to restore. So I think the restoration really goes way beyond, you know, just my role, but I can see that it's critical. And I think others have already said the importance of listening, and it's always useful to hear the pressures that students are under, because they're often under tremendous pressure. And in the undergraduate course that I direct, the human histology course, almost everyone is pre-professional. So they're very, very concerned about their GPA. And of course, I know that that's not unique to the students that I teach, but that usually comes out in the restorative dialogue, is the pressures that the students are under. So I think it's really a really helpful learning opportunity. I've only participated in one hearing, and that was a little bit more confrontational, but not very much. So I've always viewed the restorative dialogues really as a chance to learn more about what actually took place and then allow the student to reflect on it. And most students benefit enormously from that opportunity to reflect.
I just wanted to add one thing, based off of something that John said that reminded me of what Mona said earlier. That before I'd gone through my first restorative dialogue, I was thinking about it in sort of a restorative justice framework. And I was sort of unsure, like, how is the student going to make up the time that I have spent on this? How are they going to make that up to me? And I was a little bit hesitant because I didn't see how that was going to work. But I think, as John and others have said, it really is more about restoring the relationships, restoring your relationship with the student's relationship with others, and also sort of the student's perspective on themselves as a student is, I found, oftentimes a big sort of piece that needs to be addressed and gets addressed during these.
Draw brought up a really good point about the pre-professional and the stresses that students are often under. Something else that I thought I would kind of tack on there is international students in particular, just because, they're sometimes, we can't really tell who is or is not an international student, and their perception of student conduct violations may be very different than the reality. And so I found that the restorative dialogue was immensely helpful in that aspect, in the education piece of understanding of, hey, it's your first time. You're not going to get expelled. You're not going to, we're not going to jeopardize your visa. And we're here to have a conversation. I had a situation where after restorative dialogue, I went and talked with the student for about 30 minutes after that meeting, which that was that meeting I came in really nervous. I was almost afraid of, like, how is this going to turn out? And it actually led to a really insightful conversation where the student was telling me about, how things were at their previous country and how standards were in the education system. And it really gave me a whole new perspective of how different students may perceive student conduct differently, which kind of motivates me more to proactively communicate with students the importance of student conduct and what that means in the process.
Absolutely. I think everyone has made really, really good points. I think I'll pose another kind of question or thought that you guys can explore a little bit too. I think we've touched on it a good bit in this last little bit with this question. But a lot of the courses that you all are instructing are required courses. They're required for students to take. You're having obviously a ton of students in those courses, but these are required courses for the specific major that they're going to go in. So it's important that they get the information now and then move forward. Is there any way or perspective that you have when you're having these restorative dialogue conversations to make sure that students are prepared for the future in these types of courses or other courses that they're going to have to take in that specific major or just in that, future career field, and how you kind of shape that for that student?
I would often talk about how these practices are going to be required in future classes. So plagiarism, for instance, I'm very familiar with the student's curriculum. So I kind of discuss about how, hey, you're going to have papers in these upper division courses. And I'm glad we're able to have this conversation now, that we can learn how to cite correctly and understand the difference between plagiarism and self-plagiarism, and, sufficiently paraphrasing and all the fun stuff, just because I know it's definitely a lot to grasp at first. And I tell students, I'm like, imagine how good you're going to be at APA format here in a few semesters if you keep practicing now. So I always kind of tie that piece of, hey, this is a small bump in the road, but you're avoiding further pitfalls later on if you kind of take this as an educational piece and take that extra time to really ensure that you're not breaking those violations.
Yeah, let me just add to what Danielle said. So it reminds me of, again, this matter concerning a graduate student. And often students are unfamiliar with Turnitin, and they're unaware that things can be automatically scanned. And this is very significant, even if you're a professional student, if you're going to do research, or if you're a PhD student and your career is going to be research related. You'll be submitting abstracts, you'll be submitting manuscripts, and you'll be submitting images associated with, data like figures, all of which is going to be screened by a journal. So it's really bad news if the journal detects some evidence of plagiarism. It's much, much worse. So in terms of future career path, that certainly is a huge red flag to be avoided. I think in general, though, just the idea of judgment, being able to form professional identity and a sense of judgment, because ultimately what happens in my experience in these matters is that students are usually most embarrassed about a failure of judgment. And that's a very difficult thing that I think all of us work on all of our lives, is continuing to develop that sense of judgment. So I try to emphasize that, again, it's not a stop sign, it's a speed bump, and you have to take from this a sense of perspective for judgment, which has already been mentioned. But those are the two things that come to mind in terms of future career advice.
For my course, since it's definitely geared towards more health and medical, it's I don't tend to talk about within the course itself of what the future prospects are, because a lot of it has to do within the health field. But during the restorative dialogue processes, at least generally, one of the things I try to convey to the students who I've done the dialogues with is that all those struggles that they are sharing with us during that time, maybe to be more forthcoming in the next semesters, in their future, not even just in their education, like if they're going to grad school or professional school, but also within our careers, right? To be forthcoming of what we are enduring as well, because that also looks poorly on us as faculty or staff in our positions if we're not being able to communicate what we're struggling with and why we may not be reaching a deadline, And so I, at least with the deadline portions, I do say that in the orientation like quiz syllabus that I have, I kind of do similar roles of, hey, what happens if, you experience like a loss, whatever that loss is. And these are the kind of asking them those steps of what you take and trying to be lenient in that. And then during their sort of dialogue process, reminding them, say, your professors and instructors are just like you. And if you just open up and email them and let them know in advance, you never know what leniencies or, adjustments to deadlines they can make. Because I definitely that happened to me when I was in my PhD program. I needed to have my dissertation, defense moved back a little bit for some personal family stuff. So I try to convey that too. I've experienced that and I've had to ask this. So at least definitely during the restorative dialogue process, is just telling them, hey, be more forthcoming up front. That way you don't feel like you need to do XYZ because you weren't prepared for, meeting the deadline or studying for the exam.
Yeah, I'm very much the same in my course. So in my non-majors course, most students are taking it for a gen ed credit. Most of them are not. I'm not going to encounter them in upper level classes. They're not necessarily going to need this information to succeed in their field of choice. But as Mona said, I think the biggest lesson that I want students to come away from this, for the vast majority of cases, is talk to your professors before it becomes a problem. Like, we are here to help. And in a lot of restorative dialogues that I've done, it's not an official sanction, but my assignment for the students is, next semester, go talk to your professor. Like, your job for the next semester, at least one time, is to show up to office hours, meet your professor, convince yourself that they are okay to talk to, just to sort of build that skill as something that we can teach that's broader than just our course material.
Absolutely. Especially with courses that are fully online, as many of you teach and as many students are taking very often. Any additional thoughts or things that the panel want to add before we move on to the next question? Thank you all. We had some really good perspective with that one. So next question, obviously the restorative dialogue is something that you have to agree to participate in. Again, you can rescind that agreement at any point. So why do you all choose to participate in restorative dialogue? Why is that something that you're willing to do for all of the reports that you submit to our office?
I think all kind of touched upon it. All the reasons that we've been speaking about is why we continue to do it and continue to participate, because it's a good, I think a learning experience on all of our ends, like not just the students, but for us as well. It is that part where it's a dialogue. It's not scary as, as the sanctions and the hearings that are very, okay, you can't speak right now. It's this person's turn, and telling, like the family member or friend that's in there too, like, oh, you're just there to hold their hand. Like, I think it's kind of scary to be told that during those hearings, but during the dialogue it's very, what we're doing right now, even though the folks that are attending are not participating in the dialogue, we're having a dialogue with each other, and we're learning from each other, even though we've, how many times have we taught classes and how many years and different types of courses and different types of students. So I at least, one, like to show the students that I'm human and I try to be empathetic, and then two, that other professors are the same way as well, and three, just to hear them out, because I'm sure the whole process is anxiety ridden, which I know we've heard multiple times from students, and I'm sure the Student Conduct and Conflict Resolution Committee also hears too, like, why can't this get over with? Why do I have to wait for a hearing? All of that. So the dialogue really, I feel like, breaks down some barriers that might be there, especially for those of us that are only online. So that's why I participate, because I don't see my students in person at all. So
I really like your mention of the barriers piece, because I think that is a big reason to why I typically agree to the restorative dialogue. Just because, I mean, when you submit a report, a charge letter goes out, and then you get an email usually from the student saying, can I tell you my side of the story? And, I agree. I think that should be something worth of discussion, just so, we can hear everything. And I think the restorative dialogue is a great time for folks to sit down and kind of talk about everything that maybe wasn't obvious in the incident report, things that we didn't know. And I always enjoyed, academic advising is very much connecting with students, and this type of resolution helps us further connect with students, understand more about them and more about, what happened. And, I know the honor code is enforced regardless of intentionality. And sometimes it's good to know that, hey, I had all this stuff going on and this is what happens. I'm really sorry. And, just really connecting with the student at the end of the day, and just having those resolutions to give the opportunity to communicate in a shared space that is not as, intimidating or as structured.
Yeah, I think my answer echoes a lot of what Mona and Danielle have already said. That particularly in these online asynchronous courses, I think both ends, both the student and the instructor, feel sort of anonymous. It's the students don't feel like we know them because, we don't get to see them in person. And a lot of times I think the students don't feel like they're being seen, and they don't recognize that there's a human on the other end. They think it's just a bunch of prepackaged videos, bunch of talking heads. There's no actual instructor there. So doing the restorative dialogues, I think, is important for us to be able to connect with the students, but I also think is helpful for the students to be able to see the man behind the curtain, right? And to recognize that the choices that they are making, even if they are, late night stressful decisions with whatever else they've got going on, that there are people behind that. There are people that are affected by their choices. It's not just talking heads on a computer screen.
I think the only thing I can add is, so the course I direct is an in-person course with usually 40 to 50 students. So the reality is that it's a lecture and lab course, and so the labs are interactive peer teaching and learning sessions. So the reality is I get to know the students reasonably well. And I think in the cases where there's been a restorative dialogue, I think the student has felt they've disappointed me. So in fact, what happens is that the previous interaction with the student, I think, creates an extra weight for the student, which I'm aware of. So I just wanted to add that, since I do have some online courses, but not with a lot of students. And also, it's true that the courses that I'm referring to, and I'm speaking with them in mind today, are not required courses, they're elective courses. So these students are coming to take an elective credit. And actually, for the undergraduate course, we write a lot of letters of reference. So I think one of the major motivations is that students are not just interested in the grade, but also in the letter of reference. So there are a lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts, I think, for students, which can add to the stress level.
Absolutely. Thank you all for that perspective. I have a kind of follow-up question too with that willingness to opt in and participate. For your experiences specifically, what has the time commitment been like for you with restorative dialogue? How long have the conversations been? How long does it maybe take you to prepare beforehand? So when you are agreeing to opt in, what do you kind of have in the back of your mind as the additional, I guess, time commitment as opposed to another process that we might have?
I'll start with that. So the restorative dialogues, the ones that I participated in, have almost all, I think maybe with one exception, been under an hour. So much shorter than the like the sanctions hearings that used to be standard. And also less less emotional prep time, because the sort of previous way of doing it did tend to turn kind of combative, or more adversarial. That requires some build up and some like cool down time afterwards. That the restorative dialogues, because they are more of a dialogue, more collaborative, don't really take as much time to prepare as the previous way of doing things.
Yeah, I completely agree. Hearings can take what, 4-3 hours around there, and it's this very structured, very strict, and I totally get it. There has to be a process, there has to be a due process for students, but the restorative dialogue, takes a lot less time. It's a lot more flexible, in which we can kind of talk about, the emotions behind it and the connecting and breaking down that barrier there. So in terms of preparation and time spent, the restorative dialogue is definitely a lot less than like a hearing. So
I'll just say that I haven't done very many restorative dialogues, and I've done one hearing. And so my experience is the same as what's been mentioned. The only thing I would add is, I don't mean to be glib about this, but most of my role has just been to listen. So I haven't felt like there was a large emotional investment on my part, because I was just there, as a course director. I felt the emotion on the students' part, and so I was very sensitive to that. But for me, there was not, I guess, a lot of emotional impact. However, there was a fair amount of time spent, I remember recently, trying to identify what the Turnitin report percentage cutoff for plagiarism is at the University of Florida. And of course, there isn't a specific definition. But to be prepared for a hearing, I probably spent more than an hour going to the literature to try and find out and looking at syllabi to try and sort out, objectively speaking, what is a reasonable criterion for what constitutes plagiarism. And that seems like a fairly straightforward thing, but in fact, it took a lot of time. So the only time I've spent a lot of time preparing was when there was a plagiarism issue, and then the Turnitin report similarity score. Objectively, it was difficult to discuss.
That's so interesting, John, that you have that perspective. I definitely feel for the hearings. Yes, it's way more time. It's harder for me, especially with how my main role is here in pediatrics doing study research. So I have patients that I go and see, and so trying to block off 4 hours on a day is extremely difficult for me. And I know Savannah knows this from the times that she's had with me. And even if I'm not currently doing the role that I'm doing, I just think that's a lot of time and investment, right? To do. So the restorative dialogue is much shorter. And yes, I don't feel the anxiety that I mean, I still feel anxiety, don't get me wrong. I still do before going to the restorative dialogue process, but I feel like there's this almost like I joke in my head that I'm, for the hearings, that I'm this mini lawyer defending myself or something like that, trying to go back and look at the case packet and remember exactly, what did I write in there? What were the things that I was pointing out? And is this going to be brought up? Trying to go through this possible scenarios and also trying to make sure that, let's be honest, like, hey, make sure your face isn't angry or, like your face isn't emoting something that's not supposed to be like, you're trying to be um very like still, so and with the restorative dialogue process, I feel more comfortable smiling more, even, if there was a comment, like I can maybe laugh or giggle, and we can do that with the student, as opposed to with the hearing, there isn't that. I feel like it's just so cold almost, so time spent definitely less, and just overall at the end of it, I feel a little lighter and definitely more open-minded at the end of the restorative dialogue. And so that I try to remember the conversations that I've had with students in the restorative dialogue processes every semester going forward. And right before I report, a student, if there was ever that again, like I try to remember, put myself in those students' shoes and try to be more empathetic during the dialogue process. So
Thank you all so much. I want to be mindful of time and make sure that our audience has a chance to ask our panelists any questions as well. I think our next question, I think you all have done a really wonderful job of talking about the impact to yourself and to students that you've interacted with. So we won't go through this question specifically because I think you all have already answered that question. I will just put in a little tidbit before we move on to the audience Q&A session. We do have the Student Conduct and Conflict Resolution Office has developed a faculty kind of academic integrity course. So kind of a big overview about what the conduct process looks like with our office, how students interact with our process, how faculty interact with our process. So that is something that we have developed. It's available. So we will be happy to share that information out as well. It's should be available on our website fairly soon. We're trying to get some kinks worked out with the way that is going to be shared, but just wanted to share with panelists and everyone else here as well that is going to be something that will be helpful so that you can kind of prepare yourselves as well.